My boyfriend's parents said I needed to see the baby's room and then locked me inside of it. I was 3 months pregnant and finally meeting my boyfriend's family for the first time. They lived about 4 hours away, which is why it had taken so long to coordinate. When I arrived at their house, his mom opened the door before I even knocked. She immediately put her hands on my stomach without asking. "Oh my goodness, there's our grandbaby." His dad came up behind her with this huge smile and guided me inside like I might break. They sat me down in a specific armchair and his mom brought me water and a plate of snacks. "You need to stay hydrated. Are you taking your vitamins? What has your doctor said about your iron levels?" I tried to answer, but she kept firing off more questions. His dad asked if I'd been to all my appointments and seemed irritated when I said I'd only had 2 so far. "2? You should be going every week. We need to make sure everything is developing correctly." My boyfriend just sat there nodding along like this was normal. During dinner, his mom watched every single bite I took. "You need more protein. The baby needs protein for brain development." She piled more chicken onto my plate even though I said I was full. His dad asked detailed questions about my family medical history that felt way too invasive for a first meeting. After dinner, his mom stood up and clapped her hands together. "We have something special to show you. We've prepared the perfect room for you and the baby." They led me to a door I thought was a closet, but it opened to stairs going down to the basement. I followed them down expecting to see a cute nursery they'd decorated. Instead, there was a bedroom with a single bed, a mini fridge, a small bathroom, and one tiny window near the ceiling with bars on it. Medical equipment was set up next to the bed, including a fetal heart monitor and an IV stand. His mom gestured around proudly. "This is where you'll stay for the rest of your pregnancy. We can monitor you properly here and make sure nothing happens to our grandbaby." I laughed because I thought she was joking. Nobody laughed back. I looked at my boyfriend and he was staring at the floor. "I'm not staying in your basement. I have a job and an apartment and a life." His dad stepped between me and the stairs. "Your job has been notified that you're taking medical leave for the pregnancy. We had your boyfriend call them yesterday." I felt my stomach drop. I looked at my boyfriend again. What is he talking about? He finally looked up. "They just want to help. You've been so stressed and not eating right and missing appointments." I told them this was completely insane and I needed to leave right now. His mom grabbed my hands. "Sweetheart, you're not taking this pregnancy seriously enough. Do you know how many things can go wrong? We have rules here that will keep you and the baby safe. No phone because the radiation is dangerous. No internet because stress from social media affects fetal development. Supervised meals to ensure proper nutrition. Daily health monitoring. No visitors who might bring germs." I yanked my hands away and tried to push past his dad, but he grabbed my shoulders. "Don't make this difficult. We're doing this because we love that baby." I shoved his dad hard and tried to run up the stairs, but my boyfriend blocked the way. I started screaming at him to move, and he just kept saying I needed to calm down. His mom was behind me saying, "Stress hormones are terrible for the baby, you need to breathe." They physically pushed me back into the room. That's when I really looked around and saw details I'd missed. The door had a heavy-duty lock on the outside. The walls had some kind of padding on them. There was a camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. This wasn't just a room they'd prepared. This was a cell they'd built. The window was too small and too high to climb through. His mom opened the mini fridge to show me rows of pre-made meals in labeled containers. "We'll bring you fresh food 3 times a day. A doctor will come every week to check on you. You'll have everything you need and the baby will be perfectly safe." I was crying and begging them to please just let me go. I told my boyfriend I would call the police the second I got out. He looked at me with this weird, calm expression. "They won't believe you. We'll tell them you're having a mental health crisis from pregnancy hormones and we're keeping you safe until you stabilize." His mom nodded. "We did this with your boyfriend's brother and his wife 5 years ago. She fought at first too, but by the end she understood. Their baby was born completely healthy." I felt like I was going to throw up. They all started backing toward the stairs. I rushed forward, but his dad shoved me hard and I fell backward onto the bed. His mom blew me a kiss from the doorway. "Get some rest, sweetheart. You're going to need your energy. We're all so excited to take care of you." The door closed and I heard the lock slide into place with a heavy metal sound that echoed through the basement. I threw myself at the door and grabbed the handle, pulling and twisting with everything I had. It didn't move at all. The lock was heavy and solid, the kind you'd see on a commercial building. I pounded on the door with both fists until my hands started to hurt. Then I tried to find a weak spot, running my fingers along the edges where the door met the frame. Nothing gave. The door was metal and fit perfectly into the frame with no gaps I could pry at. I looked around for something to use as a tool, but the room was almost empty. I grabbed the chair from next to the bed and swung it at the door handle. The chair broke into pieces and the handle didn't even scratch. My hands were shaking and my throat felt raw from screaming, but I kept trying. I kicked at the door over and over until my foot throbbed. The camera in the corner just watched me the whole time. its little red light blinking. They were probably upstairs right now watching me fall apart and feeling good about themselves. After what felt like forever, I stopped and looked up at the window. It was my only other option. I dragged the broken chair pieces over and stacked them to climb up. The window was smaller than I thought when I got close to it. The glass looked thick and had wire running through it. I pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. The bars on the outside were welded right into the concrete wall. I could see them going deep into the foundation on both sides. Even if I somehow broke the glass, the opening was maybe 12 inches wide. I couldn't fit through that, even if I tried. I pressed my face against the glass and looked up. There was a metal grate covering the window well outside, and it had a padlock on it. I was completely trapped. My legs felt weak, and I climbed back down. The chair pieces scattered across the floor when I kicked them. I walked over to the mini fridge because I needed to see what they'd actually prepared. When I opened it, the light came on and showed rows of plastic containers stacked neatly on every shelf. Each one had a label written in his mother's handwriting. Monday breakfast, Monday lunch, Monday dinner. The dates went on for weeks. I pulled one out and saw the full nutrition information listed below the date. Protein 28 grams, carbs 45 grams, fat 12 grams, vitamin C 100%. She'd planned out every single meal like I was some kind of lab experiment. The bottom shelf had prenatal vitamins in a little organizer with the days of the week marked. Next to that were water bottles lined up perfectly and juice boxes with straws already in them. Everything was arranged like a kid's lunchbox. My stomach turned and I shoved the container back inside and closed the door. The bathroom was just as bad when I checked it. No mirror anywhere, which meant I couldn't break glass to use as a weapon or tool. The medicine cabinet was empty except for toilet paper and soap. No razor, no tweezers, nothing metal or sharp. Even the toilet paper holder was built into the wall so I couldn't remove it. I turned on the shower and only warm water came out no matter which way I turned the handle. The pressure was weak, like someone had put a restrictor on it. They'd thought of everything. The toilet was the only hard surface, but it was bolted down solid. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my head in my hands. Every possible escape route was blocked. Hours passed before I heard footsteps on the stairs. The lock clicked and my boyfriend came in carrying a tray. He wouldn't look at me at all. He set the tray down on the small table and turned to leave right away. I stood up and tried to keep my voice calm even though I wanted to scream. I asked him how he could possibly think this was okay. He finally looked up, but his eyes slid away from mine almost immediately. He said his parents were doing this because they loved the baby and wanted to make sure nothing went wrong. His voice was flat, like he'd practiced the words. I told him this was kidnapping and abuse and completely insane. He just shook his head and said I didn't understand how dangerous pregnancy could be. Then he left and locked the door behind him. I looked at the tray of food and something inside me snapped. I grabbed the plate and threw it as hard as I could against the wall. Food splattered everywhere and the plate broke into pieces. I was screaming that I wanted out right now. I picked up the cup and threw that too. Then I pounded on the door again, yelling for someone to let me out. My boyfriend's voice came through the door. He said that starving myself would only hurt the baby. He told me if I didn't eat, they would have the doctor put in a feeding tube and force feed me. His voice was still calm and matter-of-fact. I heard his footsteps going back up the stairs. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor surrounded by broken dishes and food. My whole body was shaking. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound from upstairs. Footsteps walked across the floor above me every 20 or 30 minutes. At first I thought it was just someone getting up to use the bathroom, but the pattern was too regular. The steps would walk from one end of the house to the other, pause, then walk back. After a few hours I realized what was happening. They were taking turns watching the camera feed. Someone was always awake making sure I didn't try anything. The footsteps came like clockwork all through the night. I counted them to stay sane. By the time light started coming through the small window, I'd counted over 40 trips across the ceiling. Morning came and I heard someone coming down the stairs. His mother unlocked the door and came in with another tray. She had the same big smile on her face like nothing was wrong. She looked at the food dried on the wall and the broken dishes on the floor. She made a comment about how I'd redecorated the place. Her voice was cheerful, like she was joking with a friend. She set the new tray down and said she'd bring me cleaning supplies after I ate breakfast. She acted like I was a guest at her house instead of a prisoner in her basement. I just stared at her. She patted my shoulder and told me to eat up because the baby needed nutrition. Then she left and locked the door again. I decided to try a different way. When she came back with the cleaning supplies, I spoke calmly and asked her to explain what she thought this would accomplish. I told her this was kidnapping and she would go to prison for it. She set down the bucket and mop and came over to me. She took my hand and patted it like I was a confused child. She said that concerns like mine always went away once the baby was born healthy. She told me I would understand eventually, just like the others did. Her voice was so sincere and kind that it made everything worse. She actually believed she was helping me. I pulled my hand away and she just smiled and told me to clean up when I was ready. She went back upstairs, humming to herself. That afternoon, I heard multiple people coming down the stairs. His mother unlocked the door and came in first. Behind her was a man carrying medical equipment. She introduced him as Dr. Wallace and said he was here for my first proper prenatal appointment. I recognized him from pictures I'd seen of their church. He started setting up a portable ultrasound machine on the table while his mother talked about how important it was to monitor the baby's development. I backed into the corner as far from them as I could get. I told them I wasn't letting anyone touch me. Dr. Wallace didn't even look up from his equipment. He just kept arranging his tools like I hadn't spoken. His mother's smile finally dropped a little and she called up the stairs for his father. I heard heavy footsteps coming down and knew this was about to get much worse. His father came through the door and walked straight to me without saying anything. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go in the small room. He grabbed my arms and pushed me down onto the bed, holding my shoulders against the mattress with his full weight. I kicked and twisted, but he was too strong, and Dr. Wallace moved in with his equipment like this was a normal appointment. His mother stood by the door watching with her arms crossed. I screamed for them to stop, and his father pressed down harder, making it difficult to breathe. The doctor pulled up my shirt and squeezed cold gel onto my stomach without warning. I was crying and begging them to please just let me go, but nobody responded. Dr. Wallace moved the ultrasound wand across my skin and stared at the small screen he'd set up on the table. He made notes on his clipboard between checking the monitor. His mother asked if everything looked good, and he nodded without looking up. The whole examination took maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours with his father's hands digging into my shoulders. When the doctor finally stepped back, his father let go and I curled onto my side, sobbing. Dr. Wallace wiped off his equipment and packed it away in his bag. His mother came over and tried to pat my head, but I jerked away from her. The doctor told them the baby appeared healthy based on the measurements and heartbeat. Then he said my stress levels were concerning for fetal development and could cause problems if they continued. His mother nodded like this confirmed everything she'd been saying. She told the doctor that's exactly why they needed to keep me calm and controlled here, where they could monitor everything properly. Dr. Wallace agreed and said he'd check on me again next week. They all left and locked the door, and I stayed curled on the bed shaking. The next 2 days I barely moved except to use the bathroom and pick at the food they brought. But I was watching everything. I studied every inch of that room looking for any weakness I could use. The padding on the walls was thick industrial material bolted straight through to concrete behind it. I tried pulling at the edges, but the bolts were sunk deep and I couldn't get any leverage. The bed frame was metal and welded together, then bolted to the floor so I couldn't even slide it. The mini fridge was too heavy to lift and had no removable parts. The bathroom fixtures were all one piece installed into the walls. Even the toilet paper holder was recessed into the wall with no sharp edges. The small window had bars that were set into the concrete foundation, and the glass was reinforced with wire mesh inside it. The door was solid wood with metal reinforcement, and the lock was industrial grade on the outside. I counted the bolts holding the wall padding. I measured the room by walking heel to toe. I timed how long the light from the window lasted each day. I was looking for anything that could help me, but everything was built to keep someone trapped. On the third day, I noticed something about the camera mounted in the ceiling corner. It was positioned to see most of the room, but there was a small blind spot right where the bathroom door met the wall. If I stood pressed against that specific section of wall, the angle meant they couldn't see exactly what my hands were doing. It was maybe 2 feet of space, but it was something. I tested it by standing there and moving my hands while watching the camera lens. From that position, the door frame blocked the view of my hands even though they could still see my body. I filed that information away and kept looking. His mother brought cleaning supplies that afternoon and told me the bathroom needed attention. I took the bucket and spray bottle and went in there, closing the door most of the way. I started scrubbing the toilet, and that's when I saw marks on the wall behind it. At first, I thought it was just dirt or damage, but when I looked closer, I realized they were scratches. Deliberate marks carved into the paint and drywall underneath. They were organized in groups of 5 with a line through each group. Tally marks. Someone had counted days here before me. My hands started shaking as I kept counting. 10 days, 20 days, 50 days. The marks went up the wall and continued onto the section behind the pipes. I had to twist around to see them all. 100 days, 150 days, 200 days. Then they stopped. I sat back on the floor staring at those marks and felt sick. Someone had been trapped in this room for over 200 days. His mother had said they did this with his brother's wife 5 years ago. This must have been her counting the days of her imprisonment. I kept cleaning, but my mind was racing. I moved the bed slightly to sweep under it, and that's when I saw more marks on the floor. These weren't tally marks, though. These were words carved deep into the wood beneath where the bed normally sat. The scratches were rough and uneven, like someone had used something small and not very sharp over many attempts. I had to get down on my hands and knees to read them in the dim light. Marilyn, if you fight, they hurt the baby. The letters were shaky and desperate looking. Each one had been carved multiple times to make it deep enough to read. I ran my fingers over the grooves and felt how much effort had gone into scratching this warning into the floor. Marilyn, his brother's wife. The woman his mother said eventually understood and had a healthy baby. She'd been here in this exact room carving warnings to whoever came next. That night, I heard someone coming down the stairs, and it wasn't his parents' footsteps. The lock turned, and a younger guy came in carrying a dinner tray. He looked like a thinner version of my boyfriend with the same nose and chin. This had to be Gary, the brother. He set the tray on the table and turned to leave, but I spoke up before he could. I asked him directly about Marilyn and what happened to her here. He froze for just a second, and I saw something flash across his face. Then he recovered and turned back with a blank expression. He said she was fine now and their daughter was perfectly healthy, so I should trust the process like she learned to do. I asked him how long they kept her locked down here, and he said that wasn't important. What mattered was the baby being safe, and Marilyn understood that eventually. He left quickly after that and locked the door. But I'd seen his reaction when I said her name. He knew exactly what had happened in this room. I decided to change my approach. Fighting them wasn't working, and I needed time to figure out a real plan. The next morning, when his mother brought breakfast, I ate everything on the plate without arguing. I took the vitamins she handed me and drank the whole glass of water. She looked surprised but pleased. Over the next few days, I kept eating the meals and acting calmer. I stopped yelling when they came in. I answered their questions about how I was feeling. His mother started smiling more and talking to me like we were friends. She told me that acceptance was the first step toward a healthy pregnancy. She said once I stopped fighting reality, I would see they were only trying to help. I nodded and pretended to agree while my mind was working on what to do next. Dr. Wallace came back for another examination a week after the first one. This time I didn't fight or scream when his father came down with him. I lay on the bed calmly and let the doctor do his work. I asked questions about the baby's development and what the measurements meant. Dr. Wallace seemed relieved by my cooperation and actually answered some of my questions. He spent less time restraining me and more time explaining what he was seeing on the ultrasound. I watched carefully how he entered and exited the room. His father unlocked the door from outside and held it open while the doctor came down the stairs. The doctor always set his medical bag down near the door while he set up his equipment on the table. His father stood by the door the whole time watching. After the exam, the doctor packed up his equipment and picked up his bag and left first, while his father locked the door behind them both. The routine was consistent and predictable. During that examination, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. When Dr. Wallace set his medical bag down by the door, his phone was sticking out of the side pocket. It was a newer smartphone with a black case, and I could see the edge of it clearly from where I sat on the bed. The doctor never used it during the exam and didn't seem to check it. He just left it in his bag the whole time he was working. If I could get to that bag for even 30 seconds, I could call for help. But his father was always standing right there by the door watching everything. I would need a distraction or a reason for both of them to look away at the same time. I kept acting cooperative and compliant while I thought about how to make that happen. The next morning, I waited for his mother to bring breakfast, and when I heard her footsteps on the stairs, I got into position. I doubled over on the bed and started moaning loud enough for her to hear through the door. The lock clicked and she came in carrying the tray like always, but stopped when she saw me curled up and clutching my stomach. I made myself cry and grabbed at my lower abdomen like something was really wrong. She set the tray down fast and came closer, but she didn't look scared like I hoped she would. Her face was concerned but calm and controlled. I begged her to please call an ambulance because something felt terrible with the baby, and the pain was getting worse. I made my voice sound panicked and desperate while I rocked back and forth on the bed. She pulled out her cell phone, but instead of dialing emergency services, she called someone else. I could hear the phone ringing on speaker, and then Dr. Wallace answered. His mother described my symptoms in this detached medical way, while she stayed between me and the door the whole time. She told him I was having lower abdominal cramping, and appeared distressed, and asked if he could come examine me right away. He said he would be there in 20 minutes, and she hung up. I kept up the act and kept crying that we needed to go to the hospital now because what if something was really wrong? She just patted my shoulder and said the doctor would be here soon and there was no need to panic. Those 20 minutes felt like forever, while I stayed curled up pretending to be in pain. When Dr. Wallace finally arrived, his father came down with him like before. The doctor examined me thoroughly with his equipment and checked the baby's heartbeat and pressed on my stomach in different places. After about 15 minutes, he stood up and told his mother that everything looked normal, and the baby's heartbeat was strong and steady. He said I was probably just experiencing regular pregnancy discomfort, combined with stress and anxiety. His mother thanked him and walked him back upstairs while his father stayed behind and stared at me with this knowing look. After they left, his father came closer to the bed and told me that was a stupid thing to try to. Now they knew I was still looking for ways to escape. He went back upstairs without another word and locked the door. The next day, his father came down with tools and a ladder. He spent over an hour installing a second camera in the corner opposite from the first one. I watched him work and realized he was covering the blind spot I had found near the bathroom door. When he finished, he tested both cameras from different angles and seemed satisfied. Now they could see every single corner of the room, and there was nowhere I could hide anything or do anything without being watched. I felt the last bit of privacy I had disappear completely. After he left, I looked around the room and understood that any plan I tried to make would be visible to them through those cameras. I started trying to keep track of how long I had been here by counting the meals they brought and watching the light that came through the small window. The light changed throughout the day so I could tell morning from afternoon from evening. I counted 3 meals as one day and tried to keep the numbers straight in my head since I had no way to write anything down. By my count, I had been locked in this basement for almost 2 weeks. Nobody from my job had come looking for me. Nobody from my apartment building had reported me missing. His parents had covered their tracks too well and made it look like I had just taken leave and gone somewhere voluntarily. The reality of how trapped I was started to sink in deeper. I thought about my coworkers and wondered if they believed whatever story his parents had told them. I thought about my landlord and my neighbors, and whether any of them had noticed I was gone. My boyfriend came down a few days later, and this time I didn't yell at him or bang on the door. I sat on the bed calmly and asked him quietly how he could do this to someone he said he loved. He looked surprised by my calm tone, and after a minute he sat down on the floor outside the open door. He said his parents did the same thing to Marilyn when she was pregnant with his niece, and now she has a beautiful, healthy daughter and a happy family. He said it seemed extreme at first, but his parents really did know what they were doing, and Marilyn understood that eventually. I asked him if he really believed that, or if he was just telling himself that to feel better about what they were doing to me. He didn't answer and just stared at the floor. Then I asked him what happened to the other women his family imprisoned before Marilyn, because those tally marks on the wall went back way further than just one pregnancy. His face went completely pale and he stood up fast. He said I was confused and stressed and there was only Marilyn and nobody else. He turned to leave and I reminded him he was supposed to bring dinner, but he just walked up the stairs without the tray and locked the door behind him. I had seen his reaction though, and I knew there had been others before Marilyn. The question was what happened to them and why nobody ever found out about this family's pattern. That night I heard raised voices coming from upstairs. His parents and my boyfriend were fighting about something, and their voices carried down through the vents. I pressed my ear against the wall near the small window and tried to make out what they were saying. I caught phrases like, "She's asking too many questions, and we should have waited longer like last time, and you need to stop talking to her so much." The arguing went on for over an hour and got louder at some points. I heard his mother crying at one point and his father's voice getting angry and stern. My boyfriend's voice sounded defensive and scared. Eventually the house went quiet, but I couldn't sleep because my mind was racing with what I had heard. They had done this before and something had gone wrong last time, and now they were worried I was figuring things out too fast. The next morning, his mother came down and everything about her was different. She wasn't smiling or cheerful or acting like we were friends. Her face was businesslike and cold. She set the breakfast tray down and told me they had made some decisions about my care going forward. She said they decided to limit my interactions with the family because I was getting too emotional and asking inappropriate questions that were causing unnecessary stress. From now on, Dr. Wallace would handle all my medical care and daily check-ins, and my meals would be delivered through a slot they were installing in the door. She said this was for my own good, and would help me stay calmer and more focused on the baby's health. I started to argue, but she held up her hand and said the decision was final. She picked up the empty tray from yesterday and left without saying anything else. Workers showed up that same afternoon and I could hear them in the stairwell with power tools. His father came down first and stood in the doorway watching me while 2 men carried equipment down the stairs. They started cutting into the door and installing some kind of metal slot mechanism near the bottom. I tried to talk to them and asked them to please help me, and told them I was being held here against my will. They didn't react at all and just kept working like I wasn't even speaking. His father stood right there the whole time supervising, and the workers never looked at me or acknowledged anything I said. They finished the installation in about 30 minutes and tested the slot to make sure trays could slide through. Then they packed up their tools and left. His father examined their work and seemed satisfied. Before he went back upstairs, he told me the slot would open from the outside only, and I shouldn't bother trying to mess with it. After he locked the door, I went over and looked at the new slot. It was just big enough for a food tray to fit through and had a metal cover on the outside that they could open and close. I realized the workers had probably done this exact installation before in this same room for whoever was here before me. The new routine started immediately. I only saw Dr. Wallace now when he came for weekly examinations, and his father always supervised those visits. 3 times a day, the slot would open and a tray would slide through with my meals. I never saw who delivered them or heard any voices. The slot would close as soon as I took the tray and open again later when I put the empty tray back. The isolation was so much worse than when they used to come in and argue with me or try to convince me this was all for my own good. At least then I had human contact, even if it was with my captors. Now I only had the cameras watching me silently, and the meals appearing through the slot like I was an animal being fed in a cage. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice in the room. I would narrate what I was doing or have conversations with myself about what to try next. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Sometimes I talked to the baby and told it I was sorry for bringing it into this situation, and promised I would find a way to get us both out safely. The 4th week started, and I had nothing left to do except watch Dr. Wallace during his visits. He came every 7 days like clockwork and always followed the same pattern. He set his medical bag on the floor next to the bed, always in the exact same spot about 2 feet from where I sat. Then he turned his back to me while he prepared the ultrasound equipment, arranging the gel and the wand and checking the monitor screen. Those 30 seconds when his back was turned became my entire focus. I started timing it in my head, counting the seconds until he faced me again. His phone stuck out of the side pocket of his bag, the black case visible against the brown leather. I could see the outline of it every time he set the bag down. If I could grab it fast enough and hide it before he noticed, I might have time to make a call later when he left. The camera would see me do it, but maybe I could move fast enough that his father wouldn't get down here in time to stop me. I knew it was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. The days between his visits felt endless as I planned exactly how I would move, which hand I would use, where I would hide the phone in the 2 seconds before he turned around. I practiced the motion over and over in my head until I could see it perfectly. When he finally came for the next examination, I was ready. He walked in with his father right behind him like always and set his bag down in the usual spot. My heart was beating, so hard I thought they might hear it. He turned his back to set up the ultrasound and I lunged forward off the bed, my hand reaching for that side pocket. I got my fingers on the phone and started to pull it out, but he spun around faster than I expected. His hand clamped around my wrist and twisted hard, forcing my fingers open. The phone dropped back into his bag, and he kept twisting until I cried out and fell to my knees. He didn't say anything, just held my wrist in that painful grip while he reached into his pocket with his other hand and pressed something. His father came down the stairs within 2 minutes, and I realized the doctor had some kind of alert button. They didn't hit me or yell at me. His father just started removing things from the room in complete silence. He took the few items of clothing they'd given me from the small dresser. He took the extra blanket from the bed. He went into the bathroom and came back with the shower curtain, leaving the shower completely exposed. He even peeled back some of the padding from one section of wall, exposing the bare concrete underneath. The whole time, Dr. Wallace just stood there watching me with this disappointed expression, like I was a child who'd misbehaved. When his father finished stripping the room, they both left without saying a word. Now I had nothing except the bed frame, the thin mattress, the toilet, and the mini fridge. The room felt even more like a cell than before. I sat on the bare mattress and tried not to cry because I knew they were watching. Then I heard a crackling sound and his mother's voice came through the room, so clear it made me jump. I looked around trying to figure out where it was coming from, and finally spotted a small speaker mounted in the corner near the camera. I'd never noticed it before because it blended into the wall. Her voice sounded sad and disappointed, like she was talking to a troubled teenager. She said they were very disappointed in my behavior, and these privileges would be returned when I proved I could be trusted. She said they only wanted what was best for me and the baby, and my actions today showed I still wasn't taking this pregnancy seriously. The speaker crackled off and I was alone again with just the camera watching. 2 days went by with nothing but meals through the slot and silence. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs and my boyfriend appeared outside the door. I could see through the small window in the door that he'd been crying. His eyes were red and puffy and he kept wiping at his face. He sat down on the floor right outside the door and just looked at me for a minute without saying anything. Finally, he told me his parents were talking about keeping me here for the entire pregnancy, and maybe even longer. He said they wanted to make sure I'd bonded with the baby properly and wouldn't try to run once I gave birth. I asked him how he could possibly let them do this to me and to our baby. He started crying harder and put his head in his hands. He said he was scared of his parents and what they might do if he tried to help me. He said they'd always been this way, controlling every part of his and Gary's lives. He told me that when Gary tried to leave with Marilyn before their daughter was born, his parents threatened to report them both for kidnapping the baby. They said they'd tell the police that Gary and Marilyn were unstable and dangerous and trying to take their grandchild away from them. Gary backed down because he was terrified of losing his daughter completely. I watched my boyfriend cry and felt nothing but anger toward him. He was a coward who'd helped trap me here, and now he was crying about being scared. But then he did something I didn't expect. He looked around carefully like he was checking if anyone was listening, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He slipped it under the door quickly and told me in a whisper that Marilyn sometimes visited with their daughter. He said she might be able to help me somehow. Then he got up and left before I could ask him anything else. I grabbed the paper and unfolded it. It had a phone number written on it and a note in his handwriting that said this was Marilyn's number, and she understood what I was going through. I looked at the camera and knew they'd seen him pass me the paper if they were watching. I had to hide it somewhere they wouldn't find. I folded it up as small as I could and tucked it into my underwear, the only place they'd never searched. 3 days passed with no mention of the paper from his parents, so maybe they hadn't been watching that moment. I started to hear new voices upstairs, a woman and a child. Through the small window, I could hear them in the backyard. The child was calling someone Mama, and I heard his mother's voice answering. Then I heard his grandmother fussing over them both, that same cheerful tone she used to use with me. Later that day, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs and the door unlocked. A woman walked in, and I knew immediately this was Marilyn. She looked like she was in her late 20s, but her eyes looked older, tired. She had dark circles under them, and her shoulders slumped like she was carrying something heavy. She glanced at the camera, then looked at me, and I saw everything in her face. The defeat, the resignation, the deep exhaustion of someone who'd fought and lost. She sat down on the edge of the bed and told me quietly that fighting them only made everything worse. She said if I just cooperated and did what they wanted, they'd eventually let me have a kind of normal life like she had now. I stared at her and asked why she didn't just leave right now and take her daughter with her. She looked down at her hands and explained that his parents had spent 2 years convincing everyone in their church and their whole community that she'd had serious mental health problems during her pregnancy. They told everyone she'd been suicidal and unstable, and they'd kept her safe until she got better. Now, if she tried to leave and take her daughter, they'd use that whole made-up history against her. They'd tell the courts she was mentally ill and dangerous, and they'd take her daughter away from her legally. She said she'd thought about running so many times, but she couldn't risk losing her child completely. At least this way she got to be with her daughter, even if it meant living under their control. I asked her how she survived 2 years in this room, and she looked down at her left arm, slowly rolling up her sleeve. There was a thick scar running from her wrist halfway to her elbow, the kind that looked like it had healed badly without proper medical care. She told me she tried to escape twice during her imprisonment, and the first time they caught her at the top of the basement stairs. His father dragged her back down, and they installed the second lock, and the camera blind spot got covered. The second time she made it all the way to the backyard before his father tackled her from behind. She was 6 months pregnant then, and when she fell, she tried to catch herself with her left arm. His father grabbed that same arm and twisted it behind her back until she heard the bone crack. She was screaming about the baby, and he told her this was to prevent her from hurting the baby with her reckless behavior. They didn't take her to a hospital because that would raise questions. Instead, they had Dr. Wallace come set the bone in the basement, and she spent the rest of her pregnancy with her arm in a cast that the doctor changed every few weeks. After that, she realized survival meant submission, because they would hurt her in ways that didn't threaten the baby directly. She pulled her sleeve back down, and I could see her hand shaking. Before she left, she moved closer and whispered that my only real chance was if someone from outside noticed I was missing and investigated. She said once you're inside their system, they have too much control and too many lies already established. They've spent years building relationships with their church and their community, and everyone believes they're devoted grandparents who would never hurt anyone. She squeezed my hand hard, and her eyes filled with tears. She said she was sorry she couldn't help me more, but if she tried, they'd take her daughter away, and she couldn't lose her baby. Then she stood up and walked to the door and knocked twice. His father unlocked it from outside, and she went back upstairs to her daughter without looking back at me. The days blurred together after that visit, and I started noticing changes in my body that meant I was entering my second trimester. The nausea got worse in the mornings, and I was so tired I could barely stay awake between meals. My stomach was showing more obviously now, and I couldn't hide the pregnancy anymore even if I wanted to. Dr. Wallace came for his weekly visit and spent extra time with the ultrasound equipment, measuring things and taking notes. He seemed pleased with everything he saw and told his parents through the open door that the baby was right on track for development. His mother clapped her hands together and came down to see the ultrasound screen, pointing at the tiny form and cooing about how perfect everything looked. His father stood at the top of the stairs watching and nodding with approval. The doctor packed up his equipment and reminded them about the nutrition plan he'd written up, saying the second trimester was critical for brain development. After they all left, I lay on the bed and felt the baby move for the first time. Just a tiny flutter that made me start crying because this should have been a happy moment. but instead I was trapped in a basement prison. A few days later, his mother brought my lunch tray and she was annoyed about something. She set the food down harder than usual and muttered, "That woman from my work wouldn't stop calling my phone." She said Kira had called 6 times yesterday alone and twice already this morning, leaving messages asking where I was and if I was okay. I felt this surge of hope shoot through my chest because someone was actually looking for me and not believing whatever story they'd been told. His mother noticed my expression, and her face got hard. She told me not to get any ideas because they'd already handled the work situation, and everyone believed I was on medical leave. But I could hear the worry in her voice under the anger, and I knew Kira was causing problems for their plan. His mother left quickly and locked the door, and I heard her footsteps going upstairs faster than normal. Over the next week, I learned more details about what was happening outside. His mother came down one morning and seemed chattier than usual, probably trying to convince herself everything was fine. She mentioned that his parents told my job I had a family emergency and took sudden leave. They'd used my boyfriend to send emails from my account saying I needed time away and would be in touch when I could. But apparently Kira wasn't buying the story because she'd also contacted my apartment building asking about me. His mother laughed like this was ridiculous and said some people just couldn't mind their own business. She told me Kira had even called my emergency contacts trying to track me down. I asked who my emergency contacts were, and she said my aunt in another state and my old college roommate. Neither of them had seen me in months, so they couldn't tell Kira anything useful. His mother seemed satisfied with this, but I noticed she kept checking her phone while she talked, like she was expecting bad news. That afternoon, his father went out, which was unusual because he normally stayed home to help watch me through the cameras. I heard his mother on the phone upstairs and her voice carried down through the small window. She was talking to someone and using that friendly, cheerful tone she'd used when I first arrived at their house. She told whoever was on the phone that I was staying with family during a difficult pregnancy and just needed privacy right now. She laughed at something they said and agreed that first pregnancies could be so overwhelming. She said I was getting excellent care and would reach out to people when I felt ready. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, and the whole time she sounded so convincing and normal that I realized how good they were at maintaining appearances. Nobody listening to that call would ever suspect she was lying or that I was locked in her basement against my will. During the next week, I noticed increased tension in the house, even though I could only hear bits and pieces through the window and walls. There was more arguing than usual, and I caught his mother and father having heated discussions that would suddenly stop when doors closed. His mother made frequent phone calls, and I could tell from her tone she was worried about something. His father started leaving at odd hours, and I'd hear the car starting in the middle of the night or early morning. Something was happening outside that had them concerned, and I spent hours trying to figure out what it could be. The meals still came 3 times a day, and Dr. Wallace still did his weekly visits, but everyone seemed distracted and on edge. Then one afternoon, I heard his parents in the kitchen directly above my room, and they were arguing louder than they realized. His father said something about Samuel, and his mother's voice got sharp, asking what that nosy neighbor had done now. His father told her that Samuel had apparently filed a missing person report after Kira contacted him asking if he'd seen me. My neighbor Samuel, who I barely knew beyond saying hello in the hallway, had noticed I was gone and cared enough to report it. His mother was furious and said they needed to decide whether to move me somewhere else or if they could continue claiming I was staying voluntarily. His father argued that moving me now would be too risky and draw more attention. They went back and forth about what story to tell if police came asking questions. His mother insisted they could handle it the same way they'd handled concerns about Marilyn years ago. Nobody had suspected anything then, and nobody would suspect anything now. 2 days later, I heard a car pull up outside, and then a woman's voice I didn't recognize at the front door. She was asking questions about when they'd last seen me and whether I was currently staying with them. His mother answered in that same friendly, convincing tone she'd used on the phone, saying I'd visited briefly a few weeks ago but left to stay with other relatives. The woman asked which relatives and where they lived, and his mother gave specific names and a city 4 hours in the opposite direction from where I actually lived. She sounded so calm and detailed that I knew this woman was probably believing every word. The woman asked a few more questions about my mental state and whether I'd seemed upset or unstable. His mother said I'd been a little emotional, but that was normal for pregnancy hormones. The woman thanked her for her time, and I heard the car pull away a few minutes later. I realized this might be my only chance, and I started screaming as loud as I could. I screamed that I was in the basement and I was being held against my will and someone needed to help me. I screamed until my throat burned and my voice cracked, but the basement was soundproofed and the woman was already too far away. I heard footsteps running down the stairs and his father burst through the door. He was holding duct tape and his face was red with anger. He crossed the room in 3 steps and slapped the tape over my mouth before I could move away. He leaned in close and told me if I tried that again, they would sedate me for the remainder of the pregnancy. He said they had enough medication to keep me unconscious for months if necessary, and the baby would be fine, but I'd wake up after the birth not remembering anything. His hand was still on my face holding the tape down, and I could smell his breath and see the veins in his neck. He told me that detective wouldn't be back because his mother had been very convincing, and there was no evidence I was here. Then he turned and walked out, locking the door behind him, and leaving me with the tape stuck to my mouth and tears running down my face. I stayed quiet after that, my heart still racing from screaming and the tape still stuck over my mouth. The adhesive burned my skin, and I could taste something chemical on my lips. Hours passed, and I heard them moving around upstairs, normal household sounds like they weren't keeping someone prisoner in their basement. Eventually, his mother came down and ripped the tape off without warning. The pain made my eyes water, but I didn't make a sound. She handed me a bottle of water and told me to drink it slowly, because dehydration was bad for the baby. I took the water because my throat hurt so much from screaming earlier. She watched me drink the whole thing before taking the empty bottle back and leaving without another word. 2 days went by with the same routine. Meals through the slot 3 times a day. The camera watching everything I did. No voices except the occasional footsteps overhead. Then on the 3rd morning, I heard a car pull up outside and a woman's voice at the front door again. It was that detective from before. I could tell by the tone even though I couldn't make out the words. His mother answered, and this time her voice sounded different, higher and faster than before. The detective was asking more questions, and I heard her say something about the basement. His mother said it was renovated and wasn't safe to go down there. The detective kept pushing, and his mother's voice got more strained as she made excuses. They went back and forth for several minutes before I heard the detective's car door close and the engine start up. But something felt different this time. The detective didn't believe her. I sat on the floor after they left and realized this might be my last chance before they moved me somewhere else. I needed to leave proof I was here in case someone did search the house. I went into the bathroom and got down on my knees behind the toilet where I'd found Marilyn's message scratched into the wall. My fingernails were already short, but I picked the longest one and started scratching into the painted concrete. The paint came off in tiny flakes and the concrete underneath was rough and hard. I pressed down as hard as I could and dragged my nail across the surface. It hurt, and my fingertips started bleeding, but I kept going. I scratched my full name first, then the date as best as I could remember it. Then I added the words, help, imprisoned, and pregnant, in capital letters. My fingernail cracked halfway through and the pain shot up my finger, but I switched to another nail and kept scratching. It took almost an hour to get all the words visible enough to read. When I finished, my fingers were bleeding and shaking, but the message was there next to Marilyn's old one. 2 women marked on the same wall years apart. That night I heard yelling upstairs louder than before. His parents were fighting, and I could make out some of the words through the ceiling. His father's voice was angry, and his mother sounded like she was crying. I pressed my ear against the door and caught pieces of their argument. His father said something about solving the problem permanently. His mother was saying she couldn't do that again. I heard my boyfriend's voice join in, yelling that they promised no one would get hurt this time. The word again and this time stuck in my head. There had been others before Marilyn, women who didn't survive whatever this family did to them. My hands went cold and I backed away from the door. The fighting continued for another hour before the house went quiet. The next morning I heard the lock turning earlier than usual. His mother came down the stairs and she looked different, her face tight and her movements quick. His father was right behind her and he was carrying something. His mother had a syringe in her hand and she wouldn't look at me directly. She said they were going to give me something to help me sleep and then move me to a different location where I would be safer. Her voice was shaking as she talked. His father moved to block the door and I saw the syringe more clearly now. It was big and full of clear liquid. I knew if they injected me with that and moved me somewhere else, no one would ever find me. This wasn't about keeping me safe. This was about making me disappear. I didn't think or plan what happened next. His father stepped toward me and I kicked him as hard as I could right in the knee. He went down with a yell and his mother lunged at me with the syringe. I grabbed her wrist with both hands and bit down on her hand as hard as I could. She screamed and dropped the syringe and it hit the concrete floor and shattered. Clear liquid spread across the ground and his father was getting back up. His mother was holding her bleeding hand and his father's face was red with anger. He came at me fast and backhanded me across the face. The force knocked me sideways and my head hit the metal bed frame. Pain exploded through my skull and everything went blurry for a second. I tasted blood in my mouth and my vision was spotty, but I stayed conscious. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard new sounds upstairs. Car doors slamming, multiple voices, someone knocking hard on the front door. His father froze and his mother's eyes went wide. A woman's voice called out that this was the police and they had a warrant to search the property. It was the detective. She had come back. His parents looked at each other and his father ran for the stairs. His mother was trying to clean up the broken syringe with shaking hands. She kept looking at the blood running down my face from where I hit the bed frame. She grabbed my shoulders and her voice was desperate now. She told me I had to say I came here willingly, that they were just helping me through a difficult pregnancy, that everything was fine. Upstairs, I could hear the detective demanding to see the basement. His father's voice was loud, saying the warrant didn't cover that area. There was a commotion and something crashed. Then I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Multiple people coming down fast. His mother was still trying to wipe up the blood on the floor with her sleeve. The lock turned and the door swung open. Detective Herrera stood in the doorway with 2 other officers behind her. She looked at the room and took in everything in one sweep. The camera in the corner, the locks on the outside of the door, the bars on the window, the medical equipment, the blood on my face and the floor. My face must have shown everything because she didn't ask any questions. She pulled out her radio and called for medical assistance immediately. His mother started talking fast, trying to explain, but the detective cut her off and told her she was under arrest. One of the officers moved forward with handcuffs and his mother was crying now, saying they were just trying to protect the baby. His father tried to run. I heard shouting from upstairs and then the back door slamming. Through the tiny window, I saw him running across the backyard, but 2 officers were already there. They tackled him into the grass and he fought, but they got the cuffs on him within seconds. My boyfriend was found hiding in his car in the garage. They pulled him out and arrested him too. All 3 of them were taken away in separate police cars while I was still sitting on the basement floor. My head was pounding and I couldn't quite process that this was actually happening. That someone had found me. That I was getting out. The paramedics came down the basement stairs right behind the detective and I was still sitting on the floor where his parents had left me. My whole body was shaking so hard I couldn't make it stop. One of them knelt down next to me and started asking questions about where I was hurt and how far along I was in the pregnancy. I tried to answer, but my teeth were chattering and the words came out wrong. The other paramedic opened a big medical bag and pulled out equipment while the first one kept talking to me in this calm, steady voice. They checked the cut on my head where I'd hit the bed frame and cleaned the blood off my face with gauze that stung. One of them pulled out a fetal heart monitor and asked if they could check on the baby. I nodded and lifted my shirt. The cold gel made me flinch, but then I heard the heartbeat through the speaker, fast and strong, and the paramedic smiled at me. He said the baby sounded good, and that I was safe now. They wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, even though I wasn't cold, and helped me stand up. My legs were wobbly, and one of them had to hold my arm to keep me steady as we went up the basement stairs. The house looked different now, with police officers everywhere taking pictures and writing things down. Detective Herrera was talking into her radio about needing more units and a crime scene team. They loaded me into the ambulance, and one paramedic stayed in the back with me while we drove. He kept checking my blood pressure and asking me questions about pain and dizziness. The ride felt long, but he told me we were going to the hospital where they could do a full checkup and make sure everything was okay with me and the baby. The emergency room was bright and busy with people moving fast in every direction. A nurse took me to a private room and helped me change into a hospital gown. She was gentle when she touched my arm and asked if I needed anything for pain. More people came in to examine me. A doctor who looked at the cut on my head and said I might have a small concussion. Another nurse who took my blood pressure and temperature. They asked me to describe what happened, and I started talking, but then I couldn't stop crying. The nurse handed me tissues and rubbed my back while I tried to explain about being locked in the basement for weeks. She wrote everything down on a chart and told me they were going to document all my injuries for the police. They did an ultrasound, and I watched the screen showing the baby moving around. The doctor doing the scan said everything looked normal and the baby was measuring right for how far along I should be. She printed out pictures and handed them to me. A social worker came in after the ultrasound and sat down in the chair next to my bed. She introduced herself and said she worked with people who'd been through bad situations. She asked if I had family or friends who could help me, and if I had a safe place to go when I left the hospital. I told her about Kira from work, and she wrote down the information. She explained what would happen next with the police investigation, and the court process if charges were filed. She gave me papers with phone numbers for counseling services and victim support groups. Detective Herrera showed up a few hours later with a recording device and a notebook. She pulled up a chair and asked if I felt strong enough to talk about what happened. I said yes because I wanted them to know everything before his family could make up more lies. She turned on the recorder and I started from the beginning, from arriving at their house and meeting them for the first time. I told her about them locking me in the basement and refusing to let me leave. I described the medical equipment and the camera and the locks on the outside of the door. I explained about Dr. Wallace coming to do forced exams while his father held me down. I told her what his mother had said about doing this to Marilyn 5 years ago, and how I'd found the tally marks on the wall that went back even further than that. Detective Herrera asked specific questions about dates and times and exactly what each person had said and done. She wanted to know about the layout of the room and where everything was positioned. I described the scratched message I'd left behind the toilet, and she wrote that down. She asked about Marilyn and what his mother had said about her, and I repeated the part about how she'd fought at first, but eventually understood. The detective's face got tight when I said that, and she made a note about finding Marilyn and talking to her. I told her I thought there might have been other women before Marilyn based on how many tally marks I'd counted. She promised they were searching the house completely and would find any evidence that existed. The interview lasted almost 2 hours, and by the end, my voice was hoarse from talking. The police called Detective Herrera while I was still at the hospital to tell her what they'd found. She came back to my room and said they'd located my scratched message exactly where I'd described it. They'd found Marilyn's name carved there too, along with dates that matched what his mother had said about 5 years ago. The crime scene team had pulled up some of the floorboards in the basement room and discovered things hidden underneath. There were medical records for at least 2 other women with different names and dates going back almost 20 years. They found photographs and documents that his parents had kept, probably as some kind of sick record of what they'd done. The detective said the investigation was getting bigger as they realized this family had been doing this for possibly decades. She asked if I could think of anything else that might help them find the other victims, or figure out what had happened to them. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard between his parents about solving problems permanently, and his mother crying that she couldn't do that again. Detective Herrera wrote it all down and said they were going to search the property thoroughly, including the yard and any other buildings. She told me more officers were being assigned to the case and they were looking into missing person reports from the area over the past 30 years. They brought Marilyn in for questioning the next day, and I heard about it from Detective Herrera when she came to update me. Marilyn had broken down during the interview and finally told the truth about her imprisonment. She described being locked in that same basement room for 2 full years while she was pregnant and after the baby was born. She said they'd controlled everything about her life during that time, what she ate and when she slept, and how she took care of the baby. They'd convinced everyone in their church community that she had serious mental problems and needed their help. She was scared of losing her daughter if she told the truth because his parents had spent years building a story about her being unstable. The detective assured her that she was a victim and not going to be charged with anything. Marilyn gave them details about the routine his parents had followed and the rules they'd enforced. She confirmed that Dr. Wallace had been involved in her imprisonment too, doing medical exams and helping his parents monitor her pregnancy. She said Gary had known what was happening but had been too afraid of his parents to help her escape. The detective told me Marilyn was getting her own lawyer and counseling services to help her figure out what to do next. Gary got arrested the same week as his parents, but his charges were different. The district attorney was treating him as an accessory to Marilyn's imprisonment since he'd known about it and done nothing to stop it. Gary's lawyer was claiming he'd also been manipulated and controlled by his parents his whole life. The DA was building cases against all of them for kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and conspiracy. His parents were facing the most serious charges because they'd planned and carried out multiple kidnappings over many years. My boyfriend was looking at major time too since he'd helped plan my kidnapping and had actively participated in keeping me locked up. The prosecutor assigned to the case called me to explain what charges they were filing and what the process would look like. She said his parents could get 20 to 30 years each if convicted on all counts. My boyfriend might get 10 to 15 years depending on how much cooperation he provided. Gary might get a reduced sentence if he testified against his parents and helped the investigation. Dr. Wallace's medical license had been suspended immediately, and he was facing his own criminal charges for his role in the forced medical exams and the conspiracy. They moved me to a safe house 3 days after I got out of the hospital, because Detective Herrera said the family had connections in their church community who might try to intimidate me or interfere with the investigation. The safe house was in a different part of the city in a regular neighborhood where nobody would think to look for me. A victim advocate stayed there with me and helped me get set up with new clothes and basic supplies since I didn't have anything from my apartment. Kira came to visit as soon as they told her where I was. She walked in and immediately started crying and hugging me. She said she'd known something was wrong when my emails didn't sound like me at all. She'd tried calling my phone over and over, and when my boyfriend answered and gave her weird excuses, she'd gotten more suspicious. She'd contacted my apartment building and my emergency contacts trying to find me. She'd even driven to my apartment and talked to my neighbors about whether they'd seen me. Kira brought me things from my apartment that the police had retrieved after getting my boyfriend to give them access. She stayed for hours just sitting with me and listening to everything that had happened. Samuel, my neighbor from the apartment building, had been the one to file the official missing person report that got Detective Herrera involved. He told police he'd seen my boyfriend loading my car with my belongings the day after I disappeared. He'd watched him drive my car away and thought it was strange since I'd never mentioned moving or going anywhere. When Kira had come around asking questions, Samuel had put the pieces together and called the police. His testimony helped prove that the kidnapping had been planned ahead of time and wasn't just a sudden thing. The police had found my car parked at a storage unit his parents owned, filled with my stuff from the apartment. My boyfriend had cleared out my place to make it look like I'd left voluntarily. He'd answered my phone and sent emails from my accounts to maintain the appearance that I was fine. All of that evidence was helping build the prosecutor's case that this was a planned kidnapping, and not a family trying to help someone with mental problems like his parents were claiming. The prosecutor kept me updated as the case moved forward over the next several weeks. She explained that his parents were facing 20 to 30 years each on multiple counts of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. My boyfriend was looking at 10 to 15 years for his role in planning and executing my kidnapping. Gary might get a reduced sentence, maybe 5 to 8 years, if he cooperated fully and testified against his parents. Dr. Wallace was facing his own criminal charges, and the medical board was moving to permanently revoke his license. The prosecutor said they were also investigating the other cases from years ago and trying to identify the other women who'd been held in that basement. She warned me that the trial process would take a long time, probably over a year, and I'd have to testify about what happened. She connected me with a victim advocate who would help me through the court proceedings and make sure I understood what was happening at each stage. I had to make a decision about the pregnancy, and it took weeks of counseling before I felt ready to choose. The therapist they connected me with helped me work through all the complicated feelings about carrying a baby that was connected to such a horrible experience. Part of me wanted to end the pregnancy and try to move on from everything that had happened, but another part of me felt like the baby wasn't responsible for what his family had done. After a lot of thinking and talking with the therapist, I decided to continue the pregnancy with proper medical care and support. I wanted to reclaim this experience and do it on my own terms with doctors I chose and in a place where I felt safe. The Victim Services Program helped me find an obstetrician who specialized in working with trauma survivors. I started going to regular appointments where I could ask questions and make my own choices about my care. It felt completely different from the forced exams in that basement, and slowly I started to feel like my body and my pregnancy belonged to me again instead of to his family. 4 months later, I was living in a small apartment 3 states away under a name that wasn't mine. The Victim Services Program helped me move and get set up with everything I needed. I went to therapy twice a week with a woman who worked with people who'd been through bad things, and she helped me talk about what happened without feeling like I was going to break apart. Kira moved to the same city 2 months after I did because she said she couldn't stand being so far away when I needed help. She came over almost every day to help me get ready for the baby. We bought a crib together, and she helped me put it together in the nursery. She picked out tiny clothes and blankets and made sure I had everything on the list the doctor gave me. The obstetrician I saw now let me ask questions and never touched me without asking first. Every appointment felt different because I could leave whenever I wanted. The baby came on a Tuesday morning in my 7th month of freedom. The contractions started at home, and Kira drove me to the hospital. The nurses were kind and let me make all my own choices about the birth. When they put my daughter in my arms for the first time, I looked at the hospital room door standing open. I could walk through it whenever I wanted. Nobody would stop me or lock me in. The baby was healthy and perfect. I felt the weight of everything that happened pressing down on me. But I also felt something else starting to grow. The prosecutor called 2 days later to update me on the court cases. The trials would take years to finish completely. His parents might spend decades in prison. My boyfriend would be locked up for a long time too. And I was building a life where every choice about my body and my baby and my future belonged only to me. That was enough for right now. And that wraps things up. I like when stories carry small lessons you can actually use. If this one made you think, then it did its job.